The gilded ballroom of the Ashmont Grand glowed like something carved out of a dream. Chandeliers dripping crystal, champagne pouring in endless rivers, a string quartet weaving melodies beneath the laughter of people who had never been told no in their lives. And into that dream walked Charlotte Charlie Hollister, 24 years old, a diner waitress from Queens, wearing a borrowed midnight blue gown and holding an invitation that didn't legally belong to her. Her best friend, a caterer's assistant named Sybil, had slipped her the card as a birthday gift. "One night," Sybil had begged, "one night to feel like the world belongs to you." Charlie had laughed, then cried, then said yes. Because her mother was dying in a hospice across the river, and because for 6 brutal years she had served breakfast to strangers at 4 a.m. while the city's golden children slept in penthouses above her. One night. That was the deal. She lasted 47 minutes. The man who broke her was Trenton Whitlock III, heir to a shipping fortune, the kind of man bred to humiliate anyone who couldn't trace their bloodline to the Mayflower. He spotted her the way a hawk spots something small. He cornered her near the champagne fountain. He asked loudly who she was, and when she stumbled over her answer, he snatched the invitation from her clutch and read it aloud. A name that wasn't hers. A guest list that hadn't included her. A fraud. Exposed in front of 400 of the most powerful people in New York. The room turned. The laughter began small, then grew. Then became a wave of cruelty so polished it felt rehearsed. Someone called for security. Someone else laughed that she looked like the Help playing dress-up. Trenton tilted his glass and said, with that slow, practiced smile, "Be a good girl and go pour us something before you're escorted out." Charlie couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The floor beneath her, marble inlaid with gold, felt like it was tilting toward the ocean, and then the room went quiet. Not gently, not politely, completely. Because a man had stepped out of the shadowed perimeter of the ballroom, a man whose very presence caused 2 senators to lower their drinks and a federal judge to pretend she hadn't seen him at all. Kiernan Dravith, 36, self-made, feared in 4 countries, the kind of man who owned the buildings that other billionaires rented. His name appeared in whispers more often than in print, and the whispers were never kind, but they were never disobeyed either. He walked across the ballroom without hurrying. No one in history had ever hurried for Kiernan Dravith. He stopped in front of Trenton Whitlock, and in a voice soft enough to be a razor, he said, "Apologize to her, now, loudly enough that every person in this room hears it, or I'll make certain your father's company doesn't survive the quarter." Trenton's face went the color of old paper. He apologized, twice. Then Kiernan turned to Charlie, this trembling stranger in a borrowed dress, and did the one thing no one in that ballroom had ever imagined possible. He extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" The quartet started again as if pulled by an invisible string, and Charlie Hollister, the waitress from Queens, walked out of invisibility and into the exact center of a world she had never been meant to enter. In that single turn across the marble floor, her life fractured, cleanly, completely, into a before and an after. The morning after this gala, Charlie woke up in her studio apartment to find a black car waiting outside her building. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Over the following weeks, Kiernan Dravith entered her life the way tides enter a coastline. Not in a rush, but inevitably. Flowers from a florist she couldn't pronounce. A handwritten note slipped under her apartment door. A lawyer who quietly paid off the hospice bill her mother's insurance wouldn't cover. And who left no return address, no obligation. Just a receipt marked paid in full. Charlie fought him on it. She drove 2 hours to return the receipt in person. Kiernan met her at the gates of a property that looked more like a fortress than a home. He listened to her without interrupting. When she was done, he said only, "I did it because you needed it, not because I expect anything. You're allowed to accept kindness, Charlotte." She hated that he said her full name like that. She hated that she liked it. Slowly, she learned what he was. Not a criminal, not in the cartoon sense, but a man who had built an empire in the gray spaces between legality and enforcement. Real estate, private security, international arbitration. The kind of businesses where the paperwork was clean but the methods were not always gentle. His enemies were senators, oligarchs, old money dynasties who had underestimated a boy from a Pennsylvania mining town and regretted it for 20 years. And now, Because he had danced with her. Those enemies were watching her. It started small. A stranger photographing her outside the diner. A journalist digging into her mother's medical records. A man in a parked sedan across from her building, still there at 3 a.m. when she came home from a night shift. Kiernan offered her protection, but not the kind with contracts. If I assign a security detail, they'll assume you're mine in name only. That makes you more vulnerable, not less. The only way to make them afraid to touch you is to make it publicly known that touching you would start a war. Be seen with him, be linked to him, step into the spotlight fully as the woman on Kiernan Dravith's arm. Charlie took 3 days to decide. She walked through her mother's hospice room, where the machines beeped softly, and the woman who had raised her alone could no longer remember her name. She walked through her shift at the diner, where a customer snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. She walked through the ruin of her life, and she understood something her mother had once told her. The world doesn't reward the invisible, baby. It just uses them up. She said yes, but on her terms. She kept her apartment. She kept her job at the diner. She worked 3 shifts a week, and Kiernan did not argue. She would not accept a clothing allowance. Whatever she wore in public would be borrowed, rented, or her own. And most of all, and this was the condition she pressed her finger against his chest to deliver, he would never, ever make a decision about her life without asking her first. Kiernan Dravith, a man feared in 4 countries, looked down at the small hand on his chest and agreed. The test came at the Ravenhurst auction, an annual, invitation-only event where the oldest families in the Northeast gathered to bid on art, land, and, in quieter rooms, each other's loyalties. Charlie walked in on Kiernan's arm in a dress she had chosen herself, emerald silk, simple, defiant. The whispers started before they reached the atrium. The waitress, the pretender, the charity case. A matriarch named Cordelia Van Ter, 70 years old, diamond cold, the unofficial empress of Manhattan society, intercepted them at the staircase. She smiled at Charlie the way a surgeon smiles at something she's about to remove. Tell me, dear, which finishing school? Which debutante season? Or shall we all just pretend? Kiernan's jaw tightened. But Charlie, who had served breakfast to drunks and de-escalated bar fights at 2 a.m., stepped forward first. I washed dishes to pay for night classes at Queen's College, Mrs. Van Ter. I finished my business degree last spring. I've never attended a debutante season, but I've worked every holiday since I was 16. If you have a question about my qualifications to stand in this room, ask it directly. I promise my answer will be more interesting than your insinuation. The hall went quiet. Cordelia Van Ter, who had ended careers with a raised eyebrow, blinked once. Then, slowly, she inclined her head. Not respect exactly, but acknowledgement. That was the first victory. The second came harder. Midway through the auction, a rival of Kiernan's, a Russian financier named Ilya Mstislav, who had lost a $20 million contract to Kiernan the previous winter, made a move. He outbid Kiernan on a Vermeer sketch Kiernan had intended to donate to a hospital wing named after his late sister. Then he stood, turned, and offered the sketch to Charlie with a smile that was not a smile. A gift, Miss Hollister. From one admirer to another, perhaps you'll find you prefer gentler company. It was a trap. Accepting the gift would publicly humiliate Kiernan. Refusing it would insult Mstislav in front of 300 witnesses. And Mstislav's people did not forgive insults. Charlie stood. She walked to Mstislav. She took the sketch from his hands. Then she turned to the auctioneer and said clearly, I'd like to donate this piece to St. Augustine Children's Hospital in memory of Mr. Dravith's sister, Rosalind. Please ensure Mr. Mstislav's generous name appears on the plaque. The room detonated, Bob. Not in applause, but in something rarer, shocked, grudging admiration. Mstislav's face went gray. He had been outmaneuvered by a waitress from Queens, and every person in that room had watched it happen. Later that night, when threats against her escalated, a car with Mstislav's men appeared outside the auction house. A second car blocked their exit. Charlie did not hide behind Kiernan. She stood beside him, calm and unflinching, as his security handled the confrontation without a single shot fired. In the car afterward, Kiernan looked at her in a way he had never looked at her before, not as someone he was protecting, as someone standing with him. I danced with you that night because I wanted to, he said quietly. I kept reaching out because I couldn't stop. And right now, Charlotte, I am not asking you to be my shield or my accessory. I am telling you that I love you, completely, whatever that means for whatever we build next." She did not answer him with words. She answered him with her hand on his face and her forehead against his. Two people who had begun as strategy and had become somewhere along the way something real. The threats did not stop, but they changed Kiernan. Charlie's courage at the auction had done something to him, had shown him, for the first time in 20 years, what it cost the people around him to live in his orbit. His sister had died because of an old feud he'd never finished. His mother lived under permanent security. And now Charlie, bright, stubborn, good. Charlie was walking through airport terminals with bodyguards. He made his choice. Over the next 4 months, Kiernan Draveth began the single most dangerous project of his career, dismantling every piece of his empire that required gray area methods to survive. He severed contracts with 3 governments. He closed his private security division. He handed over evidence against 2 rival families to federal prosecutors in exchange for nothing. No immunity deal, no favor owed, just the closing of doors that had been open too long. His advisors called him insane. Some of them quit. 2 of them tried to betray him and were quietly escorted out of the country. Charlie did not save him. That was not the story. What she did was stand with him, working at the diner 3 days a week because she refused to let his transformation become her dependency, asking him at night how the meetings had gone, holding him the evening the news broke that an old ally had been indicted because of information Kiernan had surrendered. She kept her identity. He rebuilt his. Together, they founded the Rosalind Draveth Foundation, named for his sister, dedicated to legal aid for working people caught in the machinery of powerful families. Charlie ran the intake program herself because she understood, better than any lawyer, what it felt like to walk into a room where everyone had already decided you didn't matter. The foundation rescued a single mother from a wrongful eviction in their first month, then a restaurant worker fighting wage theft, then 20 more. The Gray Empire became something else, not weaker, cleaner. 14 months after the night of the Ashmont Gala, Kiernan Draveth took Charlotte Hollister back to the same ballroom. It was empty this time. He had rented it for the evening, just for them, and the string quartet, and a single table set for 2 beneath the chandeliers. "The first time you walked in here," he said, "you were alone, and they tried to break you." He dropped to one knee on the marble where Trenton Whitlock had once humiliated her. "I'm not asking you because I need you. I'm asking you because every version of my future is smaller without you in it. You have your own life, your own work, your own name. I would like to share mine with you. Not own you, not protect you from a distance, but walk beside you. If you want that too." Charlie laughed through the tears. "You took a long time to ask." "I wanted to be worth the answer." She said yes. They married the following spring in a small ceremony in the Vermont hills. Sybil as maid of honor, Kiernan's mother in the front row, and the quiet absence of the world they'd both left behind. Charlie's mother had passed 2 months earlier, peacefully, in a private suite Kiernan had never told Charlie he'd paid for. Charlie had found out, and had kissed him for it, and had then made him promise never to hide a kindness from her again. Trenton Whitlock. The Third's family company had collapsed the previous autumn. He now sold insurance in Connecticut. Cordelia Vanterre had sent a handwritten note of congratulations. The Rosalind Draveth Foundation had helped 912 families in its first year. And Charlie, who had once walked into a ballroom in a borrowed dress and a borrowed name, now walked into her own life in shoes she had bought herself. The night of the wedding, she and Kiernan stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the stars over the Vermont hills, and she thought about the girl she had been a year and a half earlier, trembling near a champagne fountain, waiting for the floor to swallow her. She did not pity that girl. She thanked her, because it had taken every broken minute of that night to teach her what she now knew completely. The world did not rescue the invisible, but the invisible could sometimes rescue themselves. And when they did, they became the kind of people who could reach back and pull others through. That was the life she had chosen. Not a fairy tale, a decision. And the man beside her, who had once been feared in 4 countries and now funded legal aid in 3, squeezed her hand once, the way he had on that dance floor, a lifetime ago. 2 people, 2 worlds, 1 chosen future. A story that had begun with humiliation and ended, finally, fully, with freedom. The end. Part 2. Lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hối thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương xáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng, có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mướt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chi đàn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show but 11:02. The black car was already there when Charlie came down the stairs of her building the morning after the gala. She saw it through the grimy glass of the front door and stopped with her hand on the push bar, the way a person stops when they spot a snake in the grass. It was a sedan, the kind that looked the same in every city in the world. Tinted windows, clean paint, the quiet of something expensive trying not to be noticed. Her building sat on a block where cars like that didn't park. Her neighbors drove hatchbacks held together with duct tape and prayers. A car like that meant somebody was lost, or somebody had come for somebody. She stood there for a full minute. The radiator behind her knocked twice. Upstairs, Mrs. Petrosian's dog started barking at the pipes again, the same cranky wheeze it made every morning at 6:15. Charlie pushed the door open. The driver was already out. Older man, maybe 60, gray at the temples, wearing a coat that cost more than her rent. He didn't smile. He didn't do any of the things men did on the street when they wanted to seem harmless. He just nodded at her, opened the back door, and stood beside it the way a person stands beside a thing they've been told not to leave. Miss Hollister, I didn't order a car. No, ma'am. Mr. Dravith asked me to bring you to breakfast. He said you were welcome to refuse. Charlie looked at this car. She looked up the block toward the bus stop, where a woman in a nurse's uniform was huddled against the wind. She thought, absurdly, about the eggs she'd been planning to scramble in her kitchen. She thought about her mother in the hospice, and about the number of hours she had left on her feet this week before she could go see her. She thought about the way Kiernan Dravith had said, "May I have this dance?" and how every person in that ballroom had heard him say it. "Refuse," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." He was clear on that point. She got in the car. She told herself later that she got in because she was tired and because the driver had been polite, and because there was a small part of her that still believed the whole thing the night before had been some kind of trick and wanted to see the trick revealed. But the truth, underneath those reasons, was simpler. She got in because a man had stepped out of a shadow for her, and she needed to know why. The restaurant wasn't a restaurant. It was the upstairs dining room of a building on Mercer Street with no sign on the door. The kind of place that didn't need a sign because the people who ate there already knew where it was. The driver handed her off to a host in a waistcoat. The host walked her up a staircase lined with old black and white photographs of men she didn't recognize. And then there was a door. And then there was Kiernan Dravith sitting at a table by a window, reading a newspaper like a man who had nowhere more important to be. He looked up. He folded the paper. He stood. "You came." "I almost didn't." "I know." He pulled out the chair across from him. "Thank you." She sat. A waiter appeared with coffee without being asked. Kiernan waited until the waiter was gone, and then he looked at her properly, and Charlie found that in full daylight he was not less intimidating. He was more. The gala had given her the flattery of candles and distance. Here, with the gray morning light catching the lines around his eyes, he looked like a man who had not slept well in a long time. "I have to ask you something," she said, before he could say anything else. She had rehearsed the sentence in the car. "Last night, the dance, was that a thing? Like, was it a message or a favor to someone or a bet or..." No. Just no? Just no. He took a sip of coffee. I saw what Whitlock did. I didn't like it. And then I saw you, and I wanted to dance with you. That was the entire calculation. Men like you don't do things without calculation. That's a fair assumption. In this case, it's wrong. Charlie's hands were cold on the tablecloth. She put them in her lap. People are going to say things about me. People are probably already saying things about me. They are. Great. I can make most of it stop. Not all of it. The rest will fade on its own if you give it a few weeks. He paused. I brought you here to say I don't expect anything. From last night or this morning or anything that follows. If you want to walk out of this room and never hear my name again, that's a door I'll hold open for you myself. She studied him. She tried to find the lie in his face. She couldn't. Why are you being like this? She said. Like what? Like a person. He almost smiled. It was the first real expression she'd seen on him, and it was gone so quickly she wasn't sure she'd seen it at all. Eat something, he said. They make good bread here. She ate. They didn't talk much. When she left, the same driver was waiting at the curb, and he took her home without being told the address, which should have bothered her more than it did. That was the first time. The second time was 3 days later, when she came back to her apartment after a double shift at the diner and found an envelope on her kitchen counter. Not slid under the door. On her counter, inside her locked apartment, next to the chipped bowl where she kept her keys. She nearly called the police. Then she saw the handwriting on the front. Her name, just Charlotte, in ink. And her stomach dropped all the way through the floor. Inside was a receipt from Bellwood Hospice. Account balance, paid in full. She sat down on the linoleum. She stayed there until the refrigerator cycled on and off twice. Then she got up. She put on the coat she'd worn to the gala because it was the warmest one she owned, and she took 2 trains and a bus to the address she'd found in less than a minute on her phone, because a man who owned half of Manhattan apparently also wanted her to be able to find him. The gates were taller than her building. There was an intercom. She pressed the button and a woman's voice asked who she was, and Charlie said, "Charlotte Hollister, and I'm not leaving until I see him." The gates opened. Kiernan met her at the front door in shirt sleeves, with his hair damp like he'd come from somewhere physical. He took one look at her face and said, before she could even get the first sentence out, "Come in. It's cold." "I don't want to come in. Then I'll come out." And he did. He walked out onto the stone steps in his shirt sleeves in February and stood there like it cost him nothing. She held up the receipt. "Explain this." "It's a receipt." "Don't be cute. You broke into my apartment." "I didn't. Someone in my office paid your building super to leave an envelope on the counter. You can be angry about that. You should be. I'll make it right however you want." "You paid for my mother." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her for a long time. The wind pulled at his shirt. A dog barked somewhere on the property, and somebody, far off, called it back. "Because you needed it," he said finally. "Not because I expect anything. You are allowed to accept kindness, Charlotte, even from someone like me. Especially from someone like me." He didn't say that part out loud, but she heard it anyway, hanging between them in the cold. She tried to hand the receipt back. He didn't take it. "Keep it," he said. "If you want to pay me back, pay me back. I won't argue. But take the receipt. Your mother's care is handled. That part doesn't get undone because you're uncomfortable with me." Charlie's throat did something that was almost a laugh and almost a sob, and ended up as neither. She folded the receipt in half, then in quarters. She put it in her coat pocket. "I hate that I needed it," she said. "I know. I hate that you knew I needed it. I know that too." They stood there a while longer. Eventually he said, quieter, "Do you want to come in? Just for coffee. There's a fireplace. You can yell at me inside a warm room as easily as a cold one." She almost said no. She said yes. That was how it started, properly. Not at the gala, which had been theater, but on those stone steps, which had been something else. She didn't know what to call it. She wasn't ready to call it anything. Over the following weeks, he became a presence in her life the way weather becomes a presence. There was no schedule to it. Some days, nothing. Some days a text, short, functional. "How is your mother? How was the shift?" Some days a note hand-delivered to the diner by a courier who always tipped the hostess $20 and never stayed. He never asked to see her. He never pushed. He sent her a book once, a battered paperback of short stories by a writer she'd mentioned in passing at the breakfast on Mercer Street, which meant he had remembered, which meant he had been listening, and that was almost worse than if he'd sent her flowers. She started saying his name in her head without flinching, and then, in the fourth week, she started noticing the men. The first one was outside the diner. She came out at the end of a lunch shift with her apron balled up in her fist and a $20 tip burning through her back pocket, and there was a man across the street with a camera. Not a phone, a camera, with a lens the size of her forearm. He wasn't even trying to hide it. When she looked directly at him, he lowered the lens, looked back, and walked away. She told herself it was a tourist. The second one was a woman, mid-40s, reporter's posture, waiting outside the hospice when Charlie came out from visiting her mother. The woman asked, very politely, whether Charlie would comment on her relationship with Kiernan Draveth. When Charlie didn't answer, the woman asked, still politely, whether Charlie was aware of the hospice's recent change in billing status, and whether she could confirm who had paid the outstanding balance. Charlie kept walking. Her hand shook for an hour afterward. The third one she didn't see at all. She only knew about him because she came home at 4 in the morning after a closing shift, and there was a sedan across from her building, engine off, no lights, and she stood in her hallway with the chain on her door and watched through the peephole until 40 minutes later the car started up and drove away. She called Kiernan at 5 a.m. He answered on the second ring. He didn't sound like he'd been asleep. She wondered briefly if he ever slept. "There was a car," she said. "Tell me." She told him. He listened. When she was done, he said, "Stay where you are. I'll send someone. Not to take you anywhere, just to sit outside your building until sunrise so you can close your eyes." "I don't want your people outside my building." "Then I'll come myself." "Kiernan, I'll sit in my own car. I won't come upstairs. I won't even turn the engine off if you don't want me to. But you're not sitting in that hallway alone until 7. He was there in 20 minutes. She watched him pull up from the window. He parked across the street in the exact spot the sedan had occupied, and he sat there, and he didn't get out. After maybe half an hour, Charlie put on a hoodie, went downstairs, crossed the street, and knocked on his window. He rolled it down. "Come up," she said. "It's cold." "You said you didn't want me upstairs." "I changed my mind. People do that." He made them tea. In her own kitchen. He found the mugs on the second try, and he didn't comment on the chip in the one he handed her, and he sat at her small table in a suit that probably cost more than her car, and drank tap water tea like it was the finest thing he'd had all week. "I need to tell you some things," he said. "Okay. Some of them are things you're not going to want to hear." "Okay." He set his mug down. He folded his hands around it like he needed them to do something. "The men watching you," he said. "They're not mine. I want that clear. I've had people check, and I'd tell you if they were. They belong to other people. People who've been looking for a pressure point on me for a long time and think they might have found one." Charlie's chest tightened. "Because of a dance." "Because of a dance? Yes. I know how that sounds." "It sounds insane." "It is insane. That's the world I'm in. I'm not apologizing for the world. I'm telling you you're in it now, whether either of us likes it." She looked at him across her own kitchen table. The lamp above them flickered, the way it always did when the upstairs neighbor ran her microwave. Kiernan didn't seem to notice. "What are you exactly?" she said. He didn't flinch. She'd wondered if he would. "I own buildings," he said. "Real estate mostly. Commercial, some residential. I run a private security firm that does work for foreign governments, which is the polite way of saying, I have contracts I'd rather not read out loud. I arbitrate disputes between people who can't go to regular courts. I used to do other things. I don't anymore. Some of the people I used to deal with haven't forgiven me for walking away from that work, and some of the people I still deal with would like me to do more of it, and the balance of those two groups is what keeps me alive on any given Tuesday." "Are you a criminal?" "Not by the standards of any document a court has ever put my name on. By other standards." "Yes. In places." It was, she thought later, the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her, and the fact that he said it across her chipped kitchen table with his hands around a tap water mug made it worse, not better. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" I asked. You told me. I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear it. He let out a breath she hadn't realized he'd been holding. There's more, he said. Of course there is. The people watching you aren't going to stop. Not quickly. A cameraman and a reporter? That's nothing. That's fishing. But they're going to keep fishing until they catch something. And some of them fish with hooks and some of them fish with nets. And I would prefer very much that you not be in the water at all. So what do you want? I want to put protection on you. No. Charlotte, I said no. I'm not going to live in your pocket. I'm not going to have a man at the diner watching me refill ketchup bottles. Then there's another option, but you're going to like it less. She waited. He spoke carefully. If I assign people quietly, the people watching you assume you're a project of mine, an asset, something useful. That doesn't protect you, it makes you a more interesting target, because interesting targets are how you find leverage on me. The only way to make them afraid to touch you is to make it publicly, visibly, loudly known that touching you starts a war, which means being seen with me, on purpose, repeatedly, not hidden, the opposite of hidden. Charlie stared at him. You want me to be your girlfriend on a billboard? Not on a billboard, but yes, something like that. As a shield, not as a theater piece. It doesn't have to be real. It would have to look real. And if I say no, then I pull every resource I have and I make sure nobody gets within 100 yards of you, and I accept that it will make you more of a target the longer it goes on, and I do it anyway. Even though it's stupid. Even though it's stupid. She laughed. She couldn't help it. It came out wet, and it didn't sound right, but it was a laugh. You're telling me the smart move is to fake date a man the whole city is afraid of. Fake associate. We don't need to put labels on it. The label is other people's business. And the dumb move is to let you bankrupt yourself protecting me in secret. I wouldn't bankrupt myself, but yes. She stood up. She walked to her sink. She ran water over her hands, not because they were dirty, but because she needed the feel of something cold and ordinary. Her mother's old rosary was hanging on a hook above the faucet. Charlie had never been religious, not really, but her mother had been, and Charlie had kept the rosary there for a reason she had never bothered to examine. She touched the beads with one wet finger. She thought about the woman outside the hospice. She thought about the sedan. She thought about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs for 30 years and still died in a place she could not have afforded without a stranger's checkbook. She thought about her own life, the one she had so carefully kept small, the invisibility she had practiced since she was 14 years old. The world doesn't reward the invisible, baby. It just uses them up. She turned around. I have conditions, she said. Kiernan stood up too, slowly. Tell me. I keep my apartment. This apartment. I don't move into any of your houses. I don't stay in any of your hotels, not unless it's an emergency and I say it's an emergency. Agreed. I keep my job. At the diner. I work 3 shifts a week. I don't care how it looks. If anyone at the diner gets followed or harassed because of me, the deal is off. Agreed. And I'll make sure no one at the diner gets harassed, quietly. I don't take an allowance. I don't take a clothing budget. Whatever I wear in public I pay for, or I borrow from Sybil, or I rent. If I need to look the part for some event, I'll figure it out. He hesitated on that one. Some of these events, Charlotte, the dress codes are... I said I'll figure it out. Agreed. I'm not signing anything. No contracts. No NDAs. Nothing with lawyers. If you can't trust me on a handshake, this doesn't work. Agreed. And the last one. She walked across the kitchen. She stopped a step away from him. She put her finger deliberately in the middle of his chest, over his tie, over his heart. It was the first time she had touched him since the dance, and she felt the contact in her whole arm. You do not make decisions about my life without asking me first. Ever. Not hospice bills. Not security details. Not who I talk to. Not where I go. I don't care if the building is on fire. You ask me first. Kiernan looked down at her hand. Then he looked up, and something in his face, something guarded, something she hadn't seen move before, moved. Agreed, he said. Say it again. I won't make decisions about your life without asking you first. Good. She took her finger off his chest. Her hand was shaking. She hoped he couldn't tell. He could tell. He didn't say anything about it. One of mine for ye, Hugh, he said, after a moment. One what? Condition. She almost laughed. Go ahead. If something happens, if I call you and I tell you to go somewhere, you go. You can be angry about it later. You can yell at me about it later. But in that moment, you go. That's the one I need. She considered him. If you abuse that, she said, I walk. I won't abuse it. If you use it to control me instead of to protect me, I walk, and I don't come back and I don't answer the phone. I know. Okay? Okay? Okay, she said. We have a deal. He didn't offer to shake on it. That would have been strange. He just nodded once, slowly, and then he picked up his mug of cold tap water tea and drained it, because the man apparently did not waste things, and then he said he should go, and she said yes, he should. At the door, he paused with his hand on the knob. I'm sorry about your mother, he said. It caught her in the ribs. She's not dead yet. I know. I'm sorry anyway. He left. She stood in her kitchen for a long time after the door closed. The rosary swung very gently above the faucet from the draft. The first public appearance was a restaurant opening in Tribeca, 11 days later. Sybil came over to do her hair. Sybil had worked events for caterers for 6 years and had strong opinions about every single one of the women Charlie had served drinks to at the gala, and Sybil was not going to let her best friend walk into any room looking anything less than armed. You can't be scared in the pictures, Sybil said, through a mouthful of bobby pins. That's the whole trick. They're going to print whatever face you make. So you don't make a scared face. You make a bored face. Bored like you've already been there. Bored like you own the building. I've never been there. I don't own the building. They don't know that. They absolutely know that, Sybil. Shut up. Tilt your chin. The dress was borrowed from a woman Sybil worked with, who had once modeled and now ran a dry cleaning business in Astoria and was willing to lend a garment bag to anyone who would return it by Tuesday. It was black. It was simpler than anything Charlie had ever put on her body. Sybil had chosen it, she said, because simple didn't embarrass you and because black didn't argue with anything. You look like a person, Sybil said when she was done. That's the goal? That's always the goal. Don't be a costume. Be a person. Kiernan's car pulled up at 7. Charlie went down the stairs one at a time because the heels were not made for running. The same driver as always held the door. Kiernan was inside, in a dark suit, and when he saw her, he did not say she looked beautiful. She found later that she was grateful he hadn't, because it would have felt like a line. And instead he said, Ready? No. Fair. The restaurant was on a corner with too many lights. There were photographers, not a wall of them, the way there had been for movie stars she'd seen on TV, but enough. 6, maybe 7. The driver pulled up and Kiernan turned to her and said very quietly, You don't have to smile. You don't have to wave. All you have to do is walk in with me and act like I'm not going to let anything hurt you. Because I'm not. What if I trip? Then I'll catch you, and we'll both pretend it was on purpose. The car door opened. The flashes started before her foot hit the sidewalk. Someone yelled her name, her first name, which somehow was worse than if they'd used the last one. And Kiernan's hand found the small of her back, not pushing, just there. And they walked. They walked slowly. He did not rush her. Later, a reporter would write that Kiernan Draveth had walked his companion into the Aldridge opening with the pace of a man who owned time itself, which would annoy Charlie because the truth was simpler. He had walked slowly because she had been wearing heels. She was not good in, and because she had been about to throw up, and because the man she had put her finger on in her kitchen had noticed and adjusted. Inside was worse, and then better. Worse, because every head turned when they entered, and Charlie felt every one of them turn, and felt the calculations behind the turning. Who is she? What is she? What does she have on him? Better, because Kiernan did not leave her side for the first 40 minutes, and because the third person to approach them was an elderly woman with a cane who, when introduced to Charlie, said, "Oh, thank God, a new face," and proceeded to talk to her about the shortage of good Hungarian pastry in Manhattan for 15 minutes. And because after that first 15 minutes, Charlie discovered that she could, in fact, stand in a room of extremely wealthy people and be a person in it. Not comfortable, not welcome, but a person. Somewhere around the third hour, a woman Charlie did not know came up beside her at a cocktail table and said, in a voice pitched just loud enough for the two men standing nearby to hear, "I give it 6 weeks." Charlie turned. The woman was beautiful in that expensive way Sybil had warned her about, the kind of beauty that had been worked at, maintained, curated. Her smile was a weapon that had been sharpened on many people before Charlie. 6 weeks what? Charlie said evenly. Before he gets bored. It's always 6 weeks. I'd know. I was one of them. The woman sipped her drink. A little advice, since you seem like a nice girl. Don't fall in love with him. He doesn't have the equipment. Charlie considered. Several things occurred to her. Several of them were satisfying. She discarded all of them. Thank you for the advice, she said. I'll keep you posted. The woman blinked. It was not the response she'd been set up for. Charlie turned back to her drink. When she looked up a minute later, Kiernan was watching her from across the room, a crystal tumbler forgotten in his hand, and his expression was something she could not read. Not amusement exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that looked, uncomfortably, like it had nothing to do with the deal they had made on a handshake in her kitchen. She looked away first. In the car home, neither of them said anything for a long time. The driver took the bridge. The lights of the city slid across the window, and Charlie watched them and tried to figure out why her chest felt the way it felt. There's going to be a piece in the paper tomorrow, Kiernan said eventually. I figured. It won't be flattering. About you, I mean. They'll imply things. Your apartment, your job, the hospice, a few other items. Okay. Do you want me to read it first and tell you what's in it? Or do you want to read it cold? She thought about it. Cold. Why? Because if you read it first, you'll want to fix it. And if you want to fix it, you might do something I didn't agree to, and I don't want to be angry with you before breakfast. He almost smiled again. Second time in 6 weeks. Agreed, he said. They didn't talk after that. The car pulled up in front of her building. He walked her to the door. She had told him he didn't have to, and he had said it wasn't about have to, it was about showing the street that someone had walked her to the door, which was the whole point of what they were doing. She unlocked the front door. She turned. Good night, she said. Good night, Charlotte. You can call me Charlie. Most people do. He considered that. I like Charlotte better, he said. Why? Because most people call you Charlie. She stood in her front hallway after he'd gone, with her hand on the latch, and she thought about the woman at the cocktail table, and she thought about the small part of her that had wanted, very badly, to be the one exception to 6 weeks. And she understood, standing there in her borrowed heels, that the deal was going to be harder than she had planned for, because the deal had been built for a woman who wasn't going to let herself feel anything, and she was not entirely sure she was that woman anymore. The piece in the paper the next morning was worse than Kiernan had implied. It used the word waitress 5 times. It ran a photograph of her in the borrowed black dress under a headline that asked whether New York's most dangerous bachelor had traded down, with the kind of question mark that wasn't really a question. It mentioned her apartment in a way that implied anyone who lived in such an apartment could not possibly be dating Kiernan Dravith for real. It mentioned her mother's hospice, and it did not say who had paid the bill, but it hinted at it the way a knife hints at a cut. Charlie read it standing up in her kitchen, in her robe, with a coffee she had forgotten to drink. Then she read it again. Then she folded the paper in half and put it in the recycling bin, and she went to her closet and she pulled out the uniform for her shift at the diner, and she put it on because at 10 a.m. she was due to pour coffee for a man named Hector, who always tipped in quarters and asked after her mother by name, and she was not going to be late. On the subway, she noticed 2 men watching her from the other end of the car, not hiding it, just watching. She looked right at them. She did not look away first. When she got off at her stop, she took the stairs 2 at a time, and she walked into the diner and she tied her apron, and Hector was at the counter in his usual seat, and he looked up and said, "Rough morning, sweetheart?" And Charlie smiled at him the way she smiled at him every Tuesday and said, "Rough year, Hector. You want the usual?" He laughed. She poured his coffee. Her hand did not shake. Outside, across the street, a black sedan idled at a meter. Not Kiernan's, she could tell from the plate. And Charlie saw it through the diner window, and she understood, fully, with coffee pot in hand, that she had walked, voluntarily and with a handshake, into a life in which she was going to be watched for a long time. She also understood more slowly that she was not afraid, which was, on balance, a more dangerous thing to discover about herself than she had realized. Part 3. Lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cấm miêu tả quá mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chi đăng bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Showmore 1107. The sedan stayed parked outside the diner for 3 days before it stopped coming. Charlie didn't know if it had been called off or if whoever was inside had decided she wasn't interesting enough to follow. She hadn't asked Kiernan, and Kiernan hadn't volunteered, which she appreciated more than she would have been able to explain. The arrangement between them was becoming a shape she didn't have words for yet. They were not dating. They were not strangers. They were two people who had shaken hands in a small kitchen and who were now calling each other, on average, 4 times a week, and who saw each other in public, on purpose, roughly every 10 days. The press had done what the press did. It got tired. A pop singer had a public meltdown in a hotel lobby in Chicago, and the next morning Charlie's picture had been pushed off the gossip pages and replaced by a woman in sunglasses crying on a valet. Charlie had bought a bagel that morning and stood on the subway platform and felt for the first time in weeks something that wasn't quite relief but was in the same neighborhood. Then the invitation to the Ravenhurst auction arrived by courier, and the neighborhood changed. It came in an envelope so thick the courier needed 2 hands, wrapped in black tissue paper that someone had tied with a length of waxed cord. Inside was a card the weight of a small paperback, engraved in letters Charlie had to tilt toward the light to read. The Ravenhurst Annual. By invitation and by invitation only. Kiernan brought it to the diner. He did not bring it to her apartment because they had an unspoken understanding that her apartment was not a place for paperwork. He sat at the counter at 4 in the afternoon, the dead hour, between the lunch crowd and the early dinner crowd, and waited until she came over with the coffee pot, and he slid the card across the counter in its black tissue paper and said, "This is the one." The one what? The one where they decide about you. Charlie looked at the card. She didn't touch it. They, she said. Old money. The names you've been hearing in pieces for weeks. They've been watching. They've been deciding. Ravenhurst is where the decision gets made. Decided into what? Either you exist in that world or you don't. There's no in-between after Ravenhurst. That's the point of Ravenhurst. Charlie set the coffee pot down. She put her hands on the counter, which was chipped formica with cigarette burns from the 70s. And if I don't go, she said, then they decide you're disposable, which makes every person who's currently afraid to come near you a lot less afraid. So it's a trap. It's an auction. There are a few paintings, a piece of land upstate, a manuscript someone's great-grandfather stole from a French library in 1902. The auction is real. Everything else is what the auction is for. She picked up the card then. It was heavier than she expected. She put it back down. Tell me what I need to know, she said, Kiernan told her. He told her in the diner over 2 hours of terrible coffee, with the afternoon light going flat across the parking lot outside. He named the families. He named the rivalries. He said the name Von Terre and paused, and when Charlie asked him why he had paused, he said that Cordelia Van Terre had in 1987 ended a man's career with a single raised eyebrow during the appetizer course at a dinner party, and that this was not a joke. He said the name Mstislav and did not pause, and the not pausing was worse. Ilya Mstislav, Charlie repeated. Yes. He's the one you took the contract from last winter. He's the one I took 3 contracts from.
over 6 years. The winter one was the last straw. He's been waiting for a window. Is the auction the window? It might be. He'll be there. He doesn't miss Ravenhurst.
Charlie thought for a long time. A trucker came in, sat at the counter, ordered pie. She got up, got his pie, got him coffee, came back. Kiernan waited without comment. It was one of the things she had come to grudgingly like about him. He did not need her attention in order to exist in a room. "I have a dress," she said finally. "Okay, not a new one. An old one. Sybil's cousin is a seamstress, and she's been working on it. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to buy me something else." "I wasn't going to." "Yes, you were." "I was thinking about it," he admitted. "I hadn't done it yet." "Good. Don't." He almost smiled. Third time. She was keeping count now, which she also hadn't told him, and wasn't going to. "The dress is green," she said. "Emerald? How would I know what emerald is?" "It's green. Sybil said it suits me. Sybil is, so far, the only person in this whole thing who has not lied to me, so I am choosing to believe her." "Then the dress is emerald. Then the dress is emerald." She walked him out to the curb when he left. A habit now. They stood on the sidewalk a moment in the wet, early evening cold, and Kiernan looked at her for a beat longer than was strictly required, and Charlie pretended not to notice, and then she said, "Kiernan? Yes? If this goes badly, if I mess it up, will you be embarrassed?" He considered the question with the kind of seriousness that had started, she realized, to bother her in a very specific way. "No," he said. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not. I might be annoyed. I might be worried. I will not be embarrassed. There's a difference, and I know the difference, and I'm telling you the difference." "Why not?" "Because you're not a thing I brought to a party." "That's the answer. You don't embarrass me, Charlotte. You couldn't." She didn't know what to do with that. She stood there with her hands in her apron pockets and didn't say anything. And after a moment, he tapped the roof of the car and got in, and the car pulled away. And Charlie went back into the diner and wiped down the counter she had already wiped, and told herself she was not flustered, which was a lie, which she was getting better at telling herself. The night of the auction, she was ready 40 minutes too early and spent those 40 minutes sitting on the edge of her bed in the green dress, staring at a crack in her ceiling, breathing. Sybil had done her hair in her kitchen again. Sybil had also, without asking, made her eat half a sandwich, because Sybil had catered enough of these things to know what happened to women who went into them on an empty stomach. The seamstress had taken the dress in at the waist and let it out a half-inch in the shoulders, and the result was something that fit Charlie the way her own clothes usually didn't. Like it had been waiting for her, and not the other way around. The car came. Kiernan was in the car. He looked at her once from the seat opposite, and he said only, "You brought a coat." Sybil insisted. "Sybil is smart. Sybil knows everything. If we survive tonight, I'm buying her dinner." "I'll buy her dinner." "No, you won't. This one's mine." He let it go. He had, she had noticed, started letting things go faster. The Ravenhurst estate sat on 40 acres in the valley, and the driveway was long enough that Charlie had time to see the whole house approach in the windshield. A stone thing, with too many windows, lit from below so that it looked like a ship with its lights on, docked in a black ocean of lawn. There were cars in front of them and cars behind them. Every one of them cost more than she would earn in a decade of diner shifts, and she was aware of this, and she did not let it reach her face. Bored, Sybil had said. "You own the building." She didn't own the building, but she remembered the instruction and she held it. A woman in black tails opened the car door. Kiernan got out first. He offered Charlie his hand, and she took it, and she stepped out into the cold evening in her borrowed and altered green dress. And the two photographers working the arrivals line looked up, and one of them said, "Jesus," low, under his breath, and the other one lifted his camera, and Charlie did not smile and did not wave and walked past them, the way a person walks past weather she has decided not to feel. The atrium swallowed them. A fiddle quartet was playing in an alcove. Waiters moved among the guests with trays held at exactly shoulder height. Every person in the room had been photographed before, had been written about, had been stitched into the pages of the papers for so long that their faces had stopped being faces and had started being icons. They turned, not all at once. That would have been too obvious even for them. It happened in waves. A cluster near the staircase. A pair of women by the coat check. An old man near a case of Roman coins who did not bother to hide his inspection and who lifted a pair of glasses to his face to get a better look. Kiernan's hand at her back. Not pushing, just there. "Breathe," he said very quietly. "I am breathing." Slower, she slowed her breathing. It helped a little. It helped more when he said, in the same low voice, "The one on the staircase in the gray is a cousin of the governor. The two by the coat check are sisters. They hate each other. They'll never be in the same photograph if they can help it. The old man is harmless. He thinks everyone is a specimen. He looked at me like that for 15 years before he decided I was acceptable." "What made him decide?" "I bought him a book he'd been looking for. Took me 2 years to find it. He didn't thank me. He just stopped looking at me like that." It was the most Kiernan had ever told her about himself in a single string of sentences. She filed it away. She was going to come back to it later. Cordelia Van Ter intercepted them before they reached the first landing. She was smaller than Charlie had expected, and older, and her jewelry was so old it didn't sparkle so much as hum. She wore a dress in a color Charlie didn't know the name of, something between dove and smoke, and her gloves came up past her elbows, and her smile, when she turned it on, was a thing constructed over decades. "Kiernan," she said. "Mrs. Van Ter." "You've brought a guest." "I have." "I don't believe we've been introduced." Kiernan started to speak. Charlie beat him to it. Not because she needed to prove anything, because Sybil had told her 3 times, in the kitchen, that the thing these women could not survive was a woman who answered for herself. "Charlotte Hollister," Charlie said. "How do you do?" The matriarch's eyes moved across her. Up, down, up again. The smile held. "Hollister," she repeated. "Pittsburgh Hollisters? Or the Philadelphia branch?" "Neither. Queens." "Queens. My mother was a school nurse for 31 years. My father left when I was 3. I grew up in an apartment over a bodega on Roosevelt Avenue. I currently wait tables at a diner in Woodside on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. If you'd like to ask whether I attended a finishing school, the answer is no. If you'd like to ask which debutante season I had, the answer is also no. I finished a business degree at Queens College last spring. I paid for it in shifts. You can make the math of that mean whatever you like." The hall, around them, had gone quieter. Not silent. Quieter. Cordelia Van Ter did not blink. She did not do any of the things Charlie had expected her to do. What she did, after a pause long enough to cost Charlie a year of her life, was tilt her head a quarter of an inch. "Queens College," the matriarch said. "My husband's cousin taught there for 20 years. Accounting, terrible teacher, fine man." She paused. Then, with the smallest shift in her voice, the kind of shift that Charlie would not have caught 3 months ago. "Enjoy your evening, Miss Hollister." She moved on. Kiernan didn't say anything for a moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "That was a pass." "A what?" "She passed you. That was what that was. I've seen her fail people who had 4 generations of New York money." "I don't know what that means." "It means you're in the room now. Officially. For tonight, at least." "Great. Terrific. I'd like to sit down for a minute." He didn't laugh, but she heard the laugh he didn't do. He led her to a quieter corner of the atrium, near a case of Ottoman daggers no one seemed to be looking at, and he got her a glass of water. Not champagne water, because she had asked him in the car to make sure her first drink of the evening wasn't alcohol, and he let her stand there, breathing, for as long as she needed. "First victory," he said, when her color had come back. "Is there going to be a second one?" "Probably several. Ready?" "No." "Okay." They moved on. The auction itself began in the ballroom at 8:30, and it was as strange a thing as Charlie had ever sat through. Paintings came out on a rotating dais. Men and women with paddles lifted them or didn't. The auctioneer had a voice like an Irish priest doing a wedding. The numbers were not numbers anymore, past a certain point. They were just sounds, syllables people made when they wanted to own something. Kiernan sat beside her with his paddle across his knee and watched lot after lot go past without lifting it, and Charlie understood, after a while, that he was waiting. Lot 17 was a pen and ink drawing, small, in a simple frame, lit from above by a hanging bulb. The auctioneer called it an attributed study, Circle of Vermeer, circa 1665,
the single figure of a seated woman reading a letter by window light. Kiernan's hand tightened on his paddle. Not obviously. She only noticed because she was sitting next to him. "Something," she murmured. "My sister had a print of that drawing," he said, equally low. "In her room, growing up. She loved it." He didn't say anything else about his sister. He didn't need to. Charlie had picked up, over the past weeks, the shape of a woman named Rosalind who had died young and whose name Kiernan said only when he had to and whose photograph sat. Charlie had noticed one night, on the mantle of his library in a silver frame he kept free of dust himself. The bidding started at $60,000. It went fast. 3 paddles. Then 4. Then 2. Kiernan stayed out until 140, and then he lifted his paddle, and the room, which had been paying polite attention, started paying actual attention. He bid against a woman in burgundy from the left aisle. Then he bid against a man in the back Charlie couldn't see. Then, at $220,000, which was more than Charlie had ever heard spoken aloud in a room, Ilya Mstislav lifted his paddle from the second row on the right. Kiernan's jaw did a thing. Charlie had never seen Ilya Mstislav before that night. She had pictured him, from Kiernan's description, as a large man. He wasn't. He was medium height, compact, with very pale hair brushed very flat, and a suit that was well cut in a way that suggested it had been made in a city Charlie could not find on a map. He was also, she realized looking at him, younger than she had imagined, maybe 40, no older. He did not look at Kiernan when he raised the paddle. He looked at the auctioneer. 240, 260, 280. At $300,000, the woman in burgundy dropped out. At 320, the man in the back dropped out. It was Kiernan and Mstislav now, trading numbers back and forth, and the room was entirely silent except for the auctioneer, whose voice had climbed the way such voices do. Kiernan lifted his paddle at 380. Mstislav did not lift. The auctioneer looked at Mstislav. Mstislav made a small, deliberate, unmistakable gesture. One finger, off the paddle, pointed at Kiernan, a yielding, too polite, too public. "Sold," the auctioneer said, "to Mr. Dravith at $380,000. The room did not applaud. The room almost never applauded at Ravenhurst, Kiernan had told her in the car. The room made small, contained sounds with its throats, and the sounds now were the sound of a room that had seen something it did not understand yet, but knew it would understand by the end of the night. Mstislav stood. He did not stand for anyone else's lot. Charlie watched him rise and smooth his jacket and walk up the aisle toward them, and her stomach, which had settled for almost an hour, flipped. "Kiernan," she said low, "I see him. What do I do?" "You do nothing. You stand. You let me speak. If I touch your elbow, you take one step back." "Okay." Mstislav reached them at the end of lot 17, as the attendants were carrying the small framed drawing off the dais. He did not extend his hand. He inclined his head, a small, almost old-world motion. And when he spoke, his English was very good and very careful and a little too soft. "Mr. Dravith. Mr. Mstislav. A beautiful piece. You will donate it, I assume, to the hospital wing, for your sister." Kiernan's shoulder beside Charlie's did not move. Neither did his voice. "That's the plan." "Admirable." Mstislav turned his face toward Charlie. His eyes moved across her the way Cordelia Van Teres had, but not the way Cordelia Van Teres had. Slower, with a weight behind the looking that made Charlie's skin crawl up the back of her neck. "And this is the young lady, Miss Hollister." "Mr. Mstislav? I have heard of you." "That's flattering." "Is it?" He smiled. It was not a smile. "I wonder if you will permit me a gesture." He lifted his hand. The attendant carrying the Vermeer drawing had been paused for the entire exchange, Charlie now realized, because Mstislav had signaled him without her noticing. Mstislav took the frame from the attendant's gloved hands. He turned and he held it out to Charlie, not to Kiernan, and he said in that same very soft voice, "A gift. From one admirer of fine things to another. Perhaps you will find it suits your apartment. Perhaps you will find, in time, that my company is gentler than some." The ballroom had gone still in a way Charlie could feel in her teeth. She understood. She understood completely and immediately, the way a person standing on a frozen lake understands the sound of the first crack. Take the drawing. Humiliate Kiernan in front of 300 of the most powerful people in the Northeast. Refuse the drawing. Insult Mstislav in front of the same 300, and every one of them would remember it, and so would he. Kiernan's hand brushed her elbow. Take a step back. She did not take a step back. She looked at the drawing. She looked at Mstislav. She looked at the attendant, whose face was doing its best to be a wall. She thought, absurdly, about her mother, who had once told her that the right answer to a bully was almost never the answer the bully had set out for you. Her mother had said that at a PTA meeting about a principal when Charlie was 11. Charlie had not thought about it in years. She reached out. She took the drawing. She didn't say anything to Mstislav yet. She turned, with the drawing in her hands. The frame was heavier than it looked, and cold. And she walked, in her green dress, the 6 steps back to the auctioneer's little stand. The auctioneer looked at her with the blank calm of a man who had seen a lot of things in rooms like this one and had lived through all of them. "Sir," Charlie said. Her voice was surprisingly even. She was grateful for that. She would not have bet on it. "May I speak? Miss Hollister. I'd like to donate this piece immediately to St. Augustine's Children's Hospital for the Rosalind Draveth Memorial Wing." She paused. She turned, just her head, just slightly, to where Mstislav still stood in the aisle with his hand out, as if the drawing might still come back to him. "And I'd like to ask, respectfully, that the donation be recorded in Mr. Mstislav's name. He's been so generous this evening. It would be a shame for the plaque to miss him." The auctioneer did not react. He had not gotten to be the auctioneer at Ravenhurst by reacting. "Of course, Miss Hollister," he said. "We'll make the arrangements." Charlie handed him the drawing. He took it gravely, the way a priest takes a collection plate. The attendant standing beside him made a note in a leather book. The room breathed, all at once. Then it did something Charlie had not heard a room like this do before. It started very quietly to applaud. Not loudly. Not a gala applause. A clipped, narrow, aristocratic applause. 3 seconds of it, maybe 4, that started near the front and moved backward and then stopped, like a wave that had remembered it was a wave and was not supposed to be one. Cordelia Van Ter, from her seat on the aisle, tapped her fan against her gloved wrist twice. Mstislav's face did not change. That was almost the worst part. It did not change, and therefore it changed. The stillness of it was so complete that it made every person in the room who knew what stillness like that meant aware that they had just watched Ilya Mstislav be outmaneuvered by a waitress in a green dress. He inclined his head again, very slightly. To Charlie. Only to Charlie. "Miss Hollister," he said. "Mr. Mstislav. We will see each other again." "I imagine so. Good evening." He walked away. Kiernan did not speak. He did not need to. The hand he put on the small of her back as they walked back to their seats said everything he was not saying, and it said it loudly enough that she felt it in her throat. The rest of the auction went past them the way weather goes past a porch. Charlie did not register most of it. She sat, she drank the water he had gotten her earlier, she made small polite noises at the right moments, and she did not trust her hands yet. Her hands were going to shake eventually. She was trying to pick the time. She was going to let them shake in the car. They did not make it to the car. They made it to the driveway. The Ravenhurst driveway was curved in a long arc past the fountain, and their car was pulled up and waiting, and they were 15 feet from it when 2 men came out from behind a row of boxwood hedges to the left of the drive. They were not in black tie. They were in dark coats. They were moving fast. Kiernan saw them before Charlie did. "Charlotte." "I see them." "Behind me, now, please." She moved. She did not argue. She moved behind him, and the men kept coming, and Kiernan's driver, the same older man, the one from the sedan in front of her building, the one whose name Charlie still did not know, was already out of the car, already moving, and a second man Charlie had not seen all night appeared from the other side of the boxwood with a hand inside his coat that was, she understood, not reaching for a wallet. The 2 men from the hedge stopped. They didn't stop because they wanted to. They stopped because the air around them had changed, and because Kiernan's driver was closer than they had expected, and because the second man, whoever he was, had not taken his hand out of his coat. "Gentlemen,"
Kiernan said. One of them said something in a language Charlie didn't know. Kiernan answered in the same language. His voice was so flat it didn't sound like his. The conversation lasted 11 seconds. Charlie counted. The two men turned and walked back the way they had come. They did not hurry. They did not need to hurry. The hurry had already left the moment. Kiernan's driver opened the car door. Charlie got in. Kiernan got in after her. The door closed. The car began to move. Nobody said anything for a full minute. Then Kiernan said without looking at her, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "Charlotte?" "I said I'm fine. Ask me again in an hour and I'll tell you the real answer." He nodded. He looked out the window. His hand was resting on the leather of the seat between them, and Charlie, she didn't plan it, she did not plan a single second of it, reached over and put her hand on top of his. Just that. Not laced, not clung, just laid her hand on his, the way a person reassures themselves that something they've been worrying about is still there. Kiernan went very still. After a moment, he turned his hand over under hers, and she let him, and his fingers closed around her fingers, and he did not look at her, and she did not look at him, and neither of them said anything for the rest of the drive. He spoke once, near the bridge. "I danced with you that night because I wanted to," he said, quiet, almost to himself. "I kept calling because I couldn't stop. I'm telling you that now because if I wait for a better moment, I'll never say it, and tonight you took a drawing out of a man's hand for me in front of 300 people. And I want you to know, before anything else happens, that whatever this is, I'm in it. Real. Completely. Not as a deal. Not as a shield. I don't know what you want to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it tonight. I just wanted it in the air before we pulled up to your building." Charlie's throat did something complicated. She did not answer him with words. She wasn't ready for words. She leaned instead. She leaned in the dark of the car, across the leather between them, and she put her forehead against his shoulder, which smelled faintly of rain and a cologne she still did not know the name of, and she kept it there. He did not move. He let her stay. At her building, he walked her to the door. She unlocked it. She turned. He was closer than he usually was, and she was more tired than she had been in weeks, and her hand was still shaking. Finally, shaking. And he saw it shaking and did not remark on it, which was a kindness. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night." She went inside. She stood in her dark front hall for a long moment with her back against the door. She could still feel his hand under her hand. She could still hear the applause, the little aristocratic applause that had moved through the room like a wave and then had been told, by whatever governed such rooms, to stop. She was not the same person who had walked into the Ashmont ballroom in a borrowed midnight blue dress. She did not know yet what she was instead. She only knew that she had stood, tonight, in a room full of people who had been raised to eat women like her for breakfast, and she had not been eaten. She had handed a man his own cruelty back, wrapped in the tissue of her own politeness, and he had taken it and walked away. She had put her hand on a man who had, she now understood, been waiting months for her to put her hand there. She had made choices tonight that she could not take back. She slid down the door. She sat on the floor of her own hallway in her green dress. She did not cry, because crying would have felt like a release she had not earned yet. She pulled her phone out of her clutch. She texted Sybil. The dress worked. Then she turned the phone off and she sat there in the dark for a long time. And somewhere across the river, a man she had just put her forehead on was being driven home through empty streets, and neither of them, yet, said the word out loud for what had moved between them in the back of that car. But it had moved, and it was not going back. Part 4 lưu ý, viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mướt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chỉ đắn bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền.
Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more. Then 10. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She dozed on the couch, still wearing the green dress, kicked off the heels sometime around 3, woke at 6 with the taste of old lipstick in her mouth and her phone vibrating on the coffee table. It was a text from Kiernan, short, "Are you awake?" She typed back, "Unforgettable."
10 minutes later, there was a knock at her door. Not Kiernan. His driver, the older man, the one she had decided privately to call Walter even though his name probably wasn't Walter, holding a paper bag from the bakery on the corner 3 blocks from her building, the bakery she went to on Sunday mornings when she had the money. "Mr. Dravith said you'd want coffee," Walter said. "He said not to come up himself." "Why not?" "He said you'd need the morning." Charlie took the bag. She stood in her doorway in a robe thrown over the green dress and looked at the older man who had, the night before, put himself between her and 2 men coming out of a hedge. "What's your name?" she said. "Ma'am?" "Your actual name. I've been calling you the driver in my head, and it's making me feel like a bad person." He almost smiled. "Walter." She stared. "Are you joking?" "No, ma'am." "That's actually your name." "Since 1962. She laughed. She laughed harder than she meant to, the kind of laugh that comes out of a person who has been holding too much for too long. And Walter stood there patiently and waited for her to be done. And when she was done, he said, "I'll be downstairs if you need anything today. Mr. Dravith said you'd probably want to be left alone, but if that changes, I'm parked on the corner by the fire hydrant." "He's leaving you outside my building." "All day, ma'am." "Walter?" "Yes, ma'am. Tell him that's fine. For today. Just today. But the deal still applies. He doesn't get to decide these things without asking me, and after today, if he wants somebody sitting outside, he asks first, okay?" "I'll tell him, ma'am." He went back down. She closed the door. She ate a pastry standing up over her sink, which was disgusting of her, and which she did not care about, and then she called Kiernan, and she said 3 things. 1. "I heard you last night. In the car. I'm not ready to say anything back yet, but I heard you, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't." 2. "Walter is outside, today only. Tomorrow we talk." 3. "What are you going to do about Mstislav?" There was a pause on his end long enough that she thought the line had dropped. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the honest answer." "Kiernan, I know. I'll have an answer by tomorrow. I'm telling you today's honest answer because you asked, and because I don't want to start lying to you. That's the deal. That's the whole deal." She closed her eyes. She leaned against the sink. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow." Tomorrow. She went to work that afternoon. Her afternoon shift. She poured coffee. She listened to Hector talk about his granddaughter's science project for 20 minutes. She wiped down the counter. She helped a mother with a stroller get through the front door without spilling anything. She was, by the end of the shift, a person again. Not fully, not close to fully, but enough to eat a grilled cheese at the counter after the dinner rush and pretend, for the length of the sandwich, that the previous night had happened to somebody else. Walter was still outside when she closed up. He drove her home. She did not argue. Kiernan came to her apartment the next evening at 7. He brought a bottle of wine he did not open and a folder. He asked her at the door if he could come in, which he had not done in weeks because it had stopped being something they needed to say out loud, but he asked it now, formally, and she understood that whatever he had decided it in a way that required him to ask. "Come in," she said. He sat at her kitchen table. He put the folder down. He did not open it. "I'm going to tell you what I've been doing for the last 24 hours, he said. "And then I'm going to tell you what I've decided. And if at any point you want to stop me and ask a question, you stop me. This is not a speech, okay?" "Okay." "Mstislav isn't going to come at you directly. Not now. What happened at Ravenhurst embarrassed him in front of the only audience whose opinion he cares about, and he's going to spend 6 months pretending it didn't happen." "That's good." "That's also bad, because it means he's going to come at me instead,
And the ways he has of coming at me are all ways that touch the parts of my business that I shouldn't have anymore. The gray parts. The gray parts. Okay. He took a breath. He tapped his fingers on the folder once, and she saw him actually be nervous, which she had not, she realized, ever seen him be before. A small thing. His knuckles tight, the breath not quite finished. I've been talking to a lawyer, he said, for 6 weeks, since before Ravenhurst. I hadn't told you because I didn't want you to feel responsible for it. I want to say that first. This is not because of you, this is because of me. But you're why I did it now instead of next year or the year after, or never. Kiernan, let me finish, please. Okay, I'm going to unwind the gray parts. All of them. The private security firm, the arbitration work, the 3 contracts with governments that I shouldn't have signed in 2019 and shouldn't have renewed in 2022. I'm going to dissolve 2 of them. The 3rd I'm going to hand over to the federal prosecutor who's been asking me for 10 years to talk to him in exchange for nothing. No deal. No immunity. I haven't done anything I need immunity for. I'm not saying that for my pride. I'm saying it because it's the actual shape of what I'm about to do. I'm going to give up leverage, a lot of leverage. And the parts of my business that are clean, the real estate and the legitimate holdings, I'm going to keep. And I'm going to start a foundation. And the foundation is going to do legal aid work for people who get crushed by machines like the one I've spent my life running. Charlie did not move. The people who work for me in the gray parts are going to lose their jobs, he said. Most of them will be fine. Some of them have families. I'm going to make sure everyone lands somewhere, but some of them are going to be angry at me, and some of them are going to take it personally, and a few of them are going to try to hurt me on the way out. I've been planning for that. It's not going to be clean. I want you to know in advance that it's not going to be clean because you are going to watch some of it happen, and I don't want you to be surprised. Okay? There's going to be press. Bad press. Some of it will be about me. Some of it will be about you. Mstislav will feed some of it because he'll want to make it look like I'm running. I'm not running. I'm doing the thing I should have done 4 years ago when my sister died. And if I'd done it 4 years ago, my sister would be... His voice caught. He stopped. He didn't start again for a minute. Charlie sat very still. She did not reach across the table. She had learned, by now, that reaching across the table was not always a kindness. If I'd done it 4 years ago, he said, quieter, she wouldn't have died. That's the truth. That's my truth. I'm not saying it to you to get a response. I'm saying it because you asked me yesterday what I was going to do about Mstislav, and the answer turns out to be, I'm going to do the thing that makes him unable to touch me, which is the same thing that means I don't have to be someone who deserves to be touched. She was quiet a while. You said the foundation, she said finally. You said legal aid. Yes. For the kind of people who get crushed by machines. Yes. Like me. Yes. Kiernan. Charlotte. I don't want to run it. He blinked. I know. I'm just getting that out of the way. I'm not running your foundation. I'm not going to be the face on the brochure. I'm not going to be the girl from Queen's Story you used to fundraise. I don't want that. That's not what I'm in this for. Okay. But, he waited. I'll help with intake. Charlotte, shut up for a second. I'll help with intake. I know what it's like to walk into a lawyer's office. I know what it's like to sit in a plastic chair in a waiting room while somebody decides whether your problem is big enough to deserve their time. I've done that. I did it with my mother. I did it with the landlord when I was 22 and a roommate stole my deposit. I can tell when somebody in front of me is about to cry, and I can tell when they need water and when they need me to leave them alone, and I'm better at that than anyone you are going to hire out of law school, so I'll help with intake, if you want. He looked at her for a long time. She had not seen this particular look on him yet either. Yes, he said. I want. Good. Then that's my condition. I'll help with intake, and I'll keep my job at the diner, and I'll finish whatever I'm doing. And you tell me before you dissolve anything what you're dissolving, not for approval. I don't want approval power. I just want to not read about it in the paper first. That's my condition. Agreed. Say it the way you said it last time. I won't make decisions about the thing we're building without asking you first. Good. She leaned back in her chair. Her hands were on the table, so were his. They were not touching. There was maybe 6 inches between them. Neither of them closed the 6 inches yet. Kiernan. Yes. I heard you in the car. I said that on the phone. I wasn't ready to say anything back. I'm still not entirely ready. I want to say that part out loud because I don't want you to think my silence meant something it didn't. Okay? What I want to say, when I can say it, is something like, I don't know what I feel yet. I know what I want to feel, which is a different thing. I know that I didn't expect to be sitting here. I know that the night you danced with me, I went home and cried for an hour because I was humiliated. And I know that 3 months later, I put my forehead on your shoulder in the back of a car because I wasn't. I don't know what to call the distance between those two things. I need a little more time to know what to call it. Take the time. I will. But I wanted you to know I was taking it on purpose. I know. Okay. He stood. He did not pour the wine. He did not make any of the gestures a man in a movie would have made. What he did was reach across the table slowly and put 2 fingers against the back of her hand, a bare second, barely a touch. And then he picked up his folder and he walked out, and he closed the door behind him very quietly, and Charlie sat at her kitchen table for 20 minutes afterward and did not move. Then she called Sybil, because there are some nights where you don't call anyone else, and Sybil came over in sweatpants and brought her own wine, and they sat on Charlie's couch and did not talk about Kiernan at all for 3 hours, and it was the best thing that had happened to her all week. The unwinding was as bad as he had promised. It took 6 months. It took 6 months of phone calls and closed doors and lawyers walking in and out of buildings Charlie had never been inside. It took a partner of Kiernan's walking out of a meeting in January, calling him a name Charlie didn't repeat, and resigning by email the next morning. It took a second partner trying, very quietly, to sell a list of clients to a competitor in March, a list Kiernan had given him 11 years earlier in good faith, and being caught and being escorted, as Kiernan had predicted, out of the country by people Charlie chose not to ask about. It took Kiernan one night in February coming to her apartment at 11 p.m., sitting on her couch without taking his coat off, and saying, "I have to let Walter go." What? Not fire him, retire him. The security division is dissolving. I can't pay him from the clean accounts the way I've been paying him from the other ones. He has a pension. He has it fully funded. I set it up years ago for this. But I have to tell him tomorrow that he doesn't work for me anymore, and I don't... Charlotte, he's been with me since I was 23. She sat beside him on the couch. She did not touch him. He was not crying. Kiernan Dravith was not, as far as she had seen, a man who cried. But there was a thing happening in his face that was adjacent to crying. "Does he want to retire?" she asked. "I don't know. I haven't asked. I was going to ask you first. I know how that sounds. I know it's me asking you to validate a thing I'm already going to do. I'm asking anyway. Ask him. Ask him honestly. If he wants to stay, keep him. Find him something legitimate. He's been driving for you for, 30 years? He can drive for the foundation. Or he can drive for you, personally. On the clean payroll, whatever. Just ask him what he wants. Don't decide for him." Kiernan looked at her. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "Okay." He asked Walter the next day. Walter said he would like, if it was not too much to ask, to drive for Mr. Dravith personally for 2 more years, and then to retire to his sister's place in Florida. Kiernan told him it was not too much to ask. Walter cried a little, which Kiernan told Charlie about that night, in her kitchen, and it was the first time Charlie had ever heard him sound close to crying himself, which he didn't quite do, but which was close. In March, she finished helping him fill out the paperwork for the foundation. They named it the Rosalind Dravith Foundation. He hated the name at first, said it was self-aggrandizing, said nobody had asked Rosalind if she wanted her name on a nonprofit. And Charlie said quietly that his sister had loved the Vermeer drawing, and that somebody was going to walk into the children's hospital someday and see it hanging under her name, and that the foundation was the same kind of gift, and that if he didn't put her name on it, somebody was going to put his name on it instead, and that would be worse. He accepted the name. The foundation opened its doors in April. It had 3 lawyers on staff, 2 paralegals, a woman named Denise who ran the office and who had, in a previous life, run the office of a district attorney in Cleveland, and Charlie. Charlie worked Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, 9 to 1. The
The rest of the week she worked the diner because she had told Kiernan she would, and because the diner had become, in a way that surprised her, a kind of anchor she did not want to lose. She didn't want to be the kind of person who could not imagine her own life without her boyfriend's foundation in it. Boyfriend. She used the word for the first time in April, to Sybil, not to Kiernan, and the moment it came out of her mouth she felt it land on the floor like a glass. Say it again, Sybil said from across the kitchen island. Shut up. I need to hear it again to confirm. I am not confirming anything. Charlie, shut up, Sybil. You called him your boyfriend. I did not. You did. I have the recording. You do not have the recording. We are not in court. Emotionally, we are. Emotionally, I'm an attorney. Charlie laughed until her stomach hurt. She laughed the way she had only laughed, really, the morning Walter told her his name. The first case the foundation took, she worked intake for personally. The woman's name was Ruth. She was 46 years old, 3 kids, no husband, 2 jobs, and her landlord had filed an eviction on her in the Bronx on a technicality. A late fee from 2022 he claimed, never received. Ruth had the receipts. Ruth had every receipt from every month for 5 years, stored in a cardboard shoebox in her daughter's closet. Ruth had also been through 2 housing courts already and had been told, in slightly different words each time, that she didn't have the documentation to prove what she obviously could prove because she couldn't afford to have it notarized in the exact way the city wanted it notarized. Charlie sat across from her in the intake room. She did not wear a blazer. She had decided on her first day that she was not going to wear a blazer. She wore her regular clothes. She poured Ruth water from a glass pitcher she had brought from her own apartment, because the foundation had, for reasons she could not untangle, stocked the intake room with plastic bottles, and Charlie had looked at the plastic bottles on day 1 and said absolutely not. Okay, Charlie said. Tell me from the beginning. Take as long as you need. If you need to stop, we stop. If you need me to leave, I leave. If you don't want to tell me, you tell one of the lawyers. This is not a test. There is no wrong answer to any of this. Ruth started crying within 2 sentences. Charlie did not offer her a tissue, because Ruth had her own tissue, because women like Ruth always had their own tissue. She waited. She nodded. She asked the next question only when Ruth was ready. By the end of the week, the foundation had overturned the eviction. Ruth kept her apartment. Her oldest daughter, 15 years old, on the honor roll at a school Charlie had once interviewed at for a job and not gotten, came to the foundation office on a Friday afternoon with a card she had made out of construction paper and a box of cookies from a bakery in the Bronx, and she gave them to Charlie, not to the lawyers, and she said, "My mom said to give them to the lady with the pitcher." Charlie ate one of the cookies in the hallway after Ruth's daughter left. She leaned against the wall. She cried for about 40 seconds, completely silently, and then she pulled herself back together and went to the next intake. That was how the spring went. One family, then another, then 20 more. The foundation did not solve everything. It turned away almost half the people who came in the door, because half the people who came in the door had problems the foundation could not fix, problems that were about the shape of the world and not about a single eviction or a single wage theft or a single illegal charge. Charlie hated that part. She was not good at that part yet. She wasn't sure she was going to get good at it. Kiernan, she noticed, was changing. Not dramatically. He was not softening in the way characters and stories soften. He was still, on any given Tuesday, the man who could walk across a room and make 3 people lower their drinks. But something in the set of his shoulders had shifted. He slept more. He ate at actual mealtimes. He told her one evening in May that he had not taken a Sunday off in 17 years, and that he had, last Sunday, spent 4 hours reading a novel in his library and had fallen asleep halfway through. He said it like he was reporting an illness. She told him it sounded like rest. He said he wasn't sure what the difference was. She told him she'd help him figure it out. He smiled when she said that. Small, real. She kissed him for the first time on a Thursday in June. Not dramatically. There had been no fireworks week, no crisis that had forced the issue. She had walked into the foundation office at 9 in the morning, and he had been there already, standing by the window of Denise's office, reading a letter from a father in Yonkers whose wages had been garnished improperly for 3 years. And he had looked up at her and said, "Good morning," the way he always said good morning. And she had walked across the office and taken his face in her hands, and she had kissed him. It was fast. It was not a movie kiss. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. She stepped back. His hands had come up to her waist somewhere in those 4 seconds and had not had time to decide what to do, and they stayed there, very still, as if he was afraid moving them would make her reconsider. "Okay," Charlie said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "That was the answer, from the car, in case you were still waiting." He stared at her. For one long, unguarded second he stared at her, and she saw clearly, saw the way you see a photograph develop, that he had been waiting and that he had been not asking, and that he had decided somewhere along the way to simply let her take as long as she needed and to live in the uncertainty until she didn't. "I was still waiting," he said. "I know. You didn't have to answer today. I know. Thank you for answering. Don't thank me. Just kiss me back." He kissed her back. It was longer. Denise, from 2 doors down the hall, walked past the office, saw them through the glass, did not break stride, and did not mention it for the rest of the day, which was one of the reasons Charlie had liked Denise from the start. The threats did not stop. That was the part of it that was not in any story Charlie had ever read. The dissolving of the gray parts of Kiernan's business was supposed to have removed the threats. It did not. It changed them. In April, somebody set fire to a parked car 2 blocks from the foundation office. No injuries, no witnesses, nothing traceable. In May, one of the foundation's paralegals, a young man named Marco, got a phone call at midnight telling him to quit his job. He did not quit his job. He did, however, move back in with his mother for a month, and the foundation paid to upgrade the locks on both his apartment and his mother's, and he came back in June steady and angry and better at his work than he had been before. In July, Kiernan's house was broken into. Not a real break-in, a message. Somebody got past the perimeter fence, walked across the lawn to the kitchen door, broke 1 pane of glass in the kitchen door, walked into the kitchen, placed a single bullet standing upright on the counter, and walked back out the way they had come. The security footage caught the man from the back only. Walter, who had been in the gatehouse reading a paperback, did not realize anything had happened until the alarm went off 6 minutes after the man was already gone. Kiernan called Charlie at 4 in the morning. "I'm coming to you," he said. His voice was flat. "I'm not staying. I want to see you, and then I'm going back to the house." "What happened?" "Someone walked into the kitchen. I'm fine. Nobody was hurt. I want to see you." "Come." He came. He stood in her doorway, and she opened the door in her pajamas, and he looked, for the first time in all the nights he had ever stood in her doorway, frightened, not for himself. She could tell the difference. He was frightened because the house had been breached and she was not in the house, and the next message might not be in the kitchen. "Kiernan." "Charlotte." "Come in." He came in. He sat on her couch. She made tea. She didn't drink. He drank his in 3 swallows, which was not like him, and then he set the mug down and put his head in his hands for maybe 30 seconds, which was also not like him. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, not looking up, "and you're going to be angry." "Ask." "I want you to come stay at the house, just until I find out who came into the kitchen. A week. 2 weeks at most. I can't protect you here the way I can there, and I'm not doing well, Charlotte. I'm not doing well at the idea that somebody might decide you are the next message." She was quiet a long time. "You're asking," she said finally. I'm asking you first. I'm not packing a bag for you. I'm not sending Walter up here. I'm sitting in your living room at 4 in the morning asking. That's the deal. I know that's the deal. I'm asking inside the deal." "Okay," she said. He looked up. "Okay?" 2 weeks. Not a day longer without a new conversation. I want a desk at the house where I can work. I'm bringing my own coffee maker because yours is a nightmare, and my mother's rosary comes with me. Non-negotiable." He almost laughed. "Okay. And when the 2 weeks are up, we're going to have a bigger conversation than we've been having because I'm not going to keep having this exact conversation every 6 months for the rest of our lives. We need to decide what kind of life we're going to live. Both of us. Together. With the foundation and the house and the diner and Walter and whatever Mstislav is planning next. That's a conversation. I don't want to have it right now. I want to have it in 2 weeks, but I want to have it on the calendar." On the calendar. Kiernan. "Okay, 2 weeks, on the calendar." "Okay." She packed a bag, small, the rosary, the coffee maker, which she wrapped in a towel,
2 books she had been meaning to read and had not been reading. A photograph of her mother from before she was sick in a frame. She was careful about the frame. He watched her pack. He did not help. He understood without having to be told that helping her pack would have been wrong. At the door, she paused. She looked back at her apartment. The chipped kitchen table, the radiator that still knocked at 6:15, the rosary above the faucet that she was taking with her, the life she had built in this one bedroom with a window that looked out on an alley and a fire escape that rattled in the wind. She was not leaving it. She was going somewhere for 2 weeks. That was what she was telling herself. It was almost true. Walter was downstairs. He took her bag. He did not make a joke because Walter did not make jokes, but he did the small nod he did when he was pleased about a thing, and she saw the nod and understood it. In the car, beside Kiernan, in the dark, she put her hand on top of his hand on the seat between them again, the way she had after Ravenhurst, and this time he laced his fingers through hers without looking at her, as if he had been waiting for 6 months for this exact small thing, and she let him, and she didn't say anything about the tightness in his grip. The city slid past the windows. The sun was coming up behind them over the water. Somewhere in the dark ahead was a stone house with a broken kitchen window and a bullet standing on a counter and a conversation in 2 weeks that neither of them, yet, knew how to begin. She leaned her head back against the seat. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she rested. And for the first time in a long time, since before the gala, since before she had ever heard the name Kiernan Dravith, since somewhere in the blurred years of double shifts and hospice bills and invisibility, she understood that resting and sleeping were not the same thing, and that she had finally learned the difference. Part 5 lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hồi thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ đàn bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện, điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more. 11/14. The 2 weeks at the house became 17 days, because on the 15th day a woman was arrested at a gas station in New Jersey with a notebook in her glove compartment. The notebook had Charlie's address in it. It had the foundation's address. It had the address of the diner, with Charlie's shift schedule copied out in careful handwriting and a circle drawn around Thursday mornings. The woman was 31 years old. She had no criminal record. She had been paid in cash 3 times by a man she had met once at a coffee shop in Queens and could not describe well enough to be useful. The handwriting in the notebook, the federal agents told Kiernan through the lawyer who was now his only line to that world, matched nothing they had on file, which meant the man in the coffee shop had been careful, and which meant he had probably not been the man who had hired him either. Mstislav's name did not appear anywhere. It didn't have to. Kiernan read the report at his kitchen table. The same kitchen where the bullet had stood on the counter 17 days before. And then he folded it, and then he put it down. And then he said to Charlie, who was sitting across from him drinking coffee out of her own coffee maker, which had lived for 17 days on his expensive counter, "I don't know how to keep you safe forever." "Nobody keeps anybody safe forever," Charlie said. "That isn't a helpful answer. It's the honest one." He looked at her. "We said 2 weeks," he said. "It's been 17 days. I'm asking you what you want to do. Not telling, asking." Charlie took a slow sip of her coffee. She had been thinking about this for most of a week. She had written things down on a piece of paper and torn the paper up, and written them down again on a different piece of paper. She had called Sybil and talked it through for an hour and a half, and then not used a single one of the things Sybil had said,
because the things Sybil had said had been about Kiernan, and what Charlie had realized somewhere around Thursday was that the decision was not actually about Kiernan. It was about her. "I want to go home," she said. "Okay. I want to go home today. I want to sleep in my own bed tonight." "Okay. And I want you to come with me." Kiernan went still. "What?"
"Not to live there. Not permanently. Not tonight even, if you can't. But sometimes. I want the key in your pocket to be a real key. I want you to come up the stairs and knock. I want you to come for breakfast. I want my apartment to be a place where you exist, not a place where I used to live before I became the woman you took off the street. Because right now, this house is the only place where we're a we, and that's not working. That's the part that isn't working. This house keeps me safe, but it makes me small. I can't be small for the rest of my life. Not even for you." He did not speak for a long moment. "I didn't know that was how it felt." "I know you didn't. I didn't know how to tell you. I'm telling you now." "Okay. And I want something else. I don't know how to say this. I'm going to say it badly. Say it badly." She set her mug down. Her hands were a little cold. The kitchen, enormous, had a view through a wall of windows that she had not gotten used to and would probably never get used to. A stretch of lawn that rolled down to a tree line, birds in the trees, the distant gray thread of a river. She thought, absurdly, about the alley outside her own kitchen window. The brick wall. The fire escape. "I don't want to be the woman in the paper," she said. "The one at Ravenhurst. The one on your arm. I'm not saying I won't ever go to another one of those things. I might. But I don't want to be shaped by them. I don't want them to be the measure of my life. I want the foundation. I want the diner. I want to see my mother on Sunday afternoons for however long she has left. And I want to sit with her and not be thinking about who's watching outside the hospice. And I want you. But I want you in the middle of that, not on top of it. Does that make sense?" "Yes. Because if I'm going to keep being with you long term, I have to know I'm not becoming a version of somebody else in order to do it. I watched my mother make herself smaller for my father for a year and a half before he left. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it for anyone. Not even for the good version of a man. Not even for you." Kiernan looked down at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. Too long for a movie, too long for comfort. She let him be. When he looked up, he said, "I've been doing something wrong." "You haven't been doing anything wrong." "I have. Not in a way you caught. In a way I didn't catch. I've been keeping you here because it was easier. For me. It's easier for me to know where you are. It's easier for me to sleep. I told myself it was for your safety, and that's true, but it's not the whole truth. And the whole truth is, I have been making my own life easier at the cost of yours without admitting it, and that's not the deal. That's not the deal we made in your kitchen. I apologize." "Kiernan, I mean it. I know you mean it. I'll take you home today. I'll come tonight if you want me to. I'll figure out the security piece without making it a leash. I'll figure it out, and I'll come to you, and I'll tell you what I figured out, and I'll ask before I do any of it. That's the deal. That's the deal." She stood up. She walked around the table. She put her arms around his shoulders from behind, and she leaned her forehead against the side of his head, which was the only place she could reach from the angle she was standing at, and he reached up and put one hand over hers on his chest. "Stop apologizing," she said into his hair. "Just don't do it again." "Okay. Okay." Walter drove her home that afternoon. Kiernan stayed at the house to make calls he had been avoiding. He came to her apartment that night, at 9:30, carrying a small bag and a bottle of wine and a set of spare keys she had given him the week before, but which he had not used. He knocked. She opened the door. He didn't speak. She pulled him inside by his tie, which was ridiculous, and she laughed at herself even while she did it. And he laughed too, a real laugh, and he kicked the door shut behind him. That was the first night he ever slept in her apartment. He did not fit in her bed. It was a full, not a queen. He was a tall man, and the bed was an adult frame from IKEA she had assembled herself in 2021, and his feet hung off the end by 3 inches. He did not complain. She offered to order a bigger bed. He said no. He said he wanted to remember this bed, later, when they had bigger beds elsewhere. She called him a sap. He agreed that he was being a sap. She fell asleep on his shoulder, and he did not move for the whole night because he was afraid of waking her, and in the morning he had a crick in his neck that made her laugh until she cried. She drove back to her mother that Sunday. Her mother had been declining slowly for months. The hospice had moved her, in July, to a quieter wing where the morphine came more frequently, and the visits had started to feel like sitting beside a person who was already partway gone. Charlie went every Sunday afternoon. She brought flowers that the staff took from her at the door because of the allergy policy, and she brought a paperback she would read aloud from for an hour whether her mother was awake or not. And she brought, every single week, a small battered photograph of her mother at 23, on the day she had bought her first car, leaning against a rusted Datsun with a smile that Charlie had always said was the smile her own face made when it wasn't performing. That Sunday, her mother was awake. Her mother was awake, and she looked at Charlie in a way she hadn't looked at her in weeks. The kind of look where Charlie could tell the look had found her, specifically, and not just the general outline of a daughter-shaped figure at the bedside. "You look different," her mother said. Her voice was very small. It hadn't carried in months. Charlie leaned in to hear it. "Different how, Mama?" "Less tired." Charlie felt her throat close. "I've been sleeping a little better." "Is that what you're calling him?" "Mama." "I'm not blind, Charlotte." Charlie laughed, wet, ugly, the way she only laughed in this room, and took her mother's hand. Her mother's hand had always been the hand that did things. Poured coffee, braided hair, counted coins out of a jar. Now it was thin and cold, and it took two of Charlie's hands to hold it. "He makes me better," Charlie said. "That's the best way I can explain it. He doesn't make me safe. He doesn't make me richer. I guess, technically, but that's not the point. He makes me a better version of the person I was going to be anyway. He lets me be that version. That's the thing." "Does he love you?" "Yes." "Do you love him?" "Yes." "Then marry him." "Mama." "I mean it. Before I go, I would like to see it. I would like to not worry about it." Charlie bent her head down over her mother's hand. She pressed her mouth to the thin wrist above the IV line, and she did not cry because her mother hated when she cried. And she said into her mother's wrist, "You don't have to worry, Mama. I promise. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be better than okay, even when you're not here. Especially then. Because you made me the person who can be." Her mother did not answer. She had drifted again. Her hand was still in Charlie's. Her mother died on a Tuesday in September. It was quiet. The hospice called Charlie at 6 in the morning. Charlie was at the apartment. Kiernan was there too. He had started spending nights there 2 or 3 times a week, and Tuesday was one of his nights because Tuesday was the night the foundation did not have a late intake. And when the phone rang, he was already awake, reading email in the kitchen in a t-shirt and sweatpants he had started keeping at her place. Charlie took the call. She said okay 3 times in a row. She hung up. She stood in her bedroom doorway in her pajamas, and she looked at Kiernan, and she didn't have to say anything because he had already set down the phone in his hand and stood up from the kitchen table, and he crossed the apartment in 6 steps and pulled her against him. And that was how she cried, for the first time. The full cry she had been holding for a year, against his t-shirt, in her own kitchen, with the refrigerator cycling behind them, and the radiator upstairs knocking through Mrs. Petrosian's pipes. He did not say any of the useless things. He did not say she's in a better place. He did not say she's not suffering anymore. He did not say anything at all. He held her. He put one hand on the back of her head and he held her, and when her knees gave a little, he held her harder, and he stayed on his feet so she didn't have to. He handled everything she couldn't handle that morning. The hospice, the funeral home, the call to the pastor at her mother's old parish. Charlie sat on the kitchen floor. She had slid down the cabinets at some point, and he had joined her on the tile, still holding her. And he made the calls with one arm still around her, and he did not once make a decision she had not already given him a nod for. Even inside her grief, he checked. He whispered the question. She nodded. He made the call. He whispered the next question. She nodded. That was how they moved through the morning. He did not take over. He did not become the strong one. He was instead a hand on her back through every single tiny, horrible phone call. And she understood, sitting on her kitchen floor with her eyes burning and her mother's rosary in her free hand, that this was, maybe, the actual deal. Not the gala, not the auction. This quiet Tuesday. This was what she had said yes to, without knowing it yet, on a stone step in February. She buried her mother on a Friday. Sybil came. Walter came, which Charlie had not expected and which made her cry again, right there in the church pew. Kiernan sat beside her and held her hand and did not let go for the whole service. Two things happened after her mother's funeral. The first was Mstislav. He was indicted in October. Not because of Kiernan, not directly. He was indicted by the Southern District of New York on wire fraud and money laundering charges that had been quietly assembling for 4 years, and the investigation was not connected to any of the gray businesses Kiernan had closed, which was a small professional pride for Kiernan and a practical mercy for everyone else. Mstislav's name disappeared from the papers in New York within 6 months. He moved to a country with no extradition treaty. Charlie did not know, and did not ask, whether Kiernan had made any phone calls that had helped that timeline along. She decided, somewhere in November, that there were parts of Kiernan's old life she was not going to excavate. Some of them she needed him to handle without her. Some of them he needed to handle without her, too. That was a condition they had never written down, but had come to anyway. The second was Kiernan. He waited, she realized later, a full 11 months after her mother died. Not because he didn't want to ask sooner, because he was determined, in a way that was very Kiernan, and that she would not have agreed to if he had asked her opinion about the timing, not to ask her any big question within a year of her loss. He thought grief and big questions did not belong in the same room. He was half right about this. Charlie thought he was half wrong. She let him have the half right, because it was the part he needed. He asked her the following August, on the anniversary of her first kiss at the foundation office. He did not do it at the house. He did not do it at the Ashmont. He did not do it at any of the rooms she had, over the previous 2 years, been afraid of. He did it in her apartment, which she still kept, which she still worked from on Tuesday mornings, which she had started to think of as home in a way that had finally settled into her chest. At the chipped kitchen table where they had made all of their real decisions. He cooked dinner. He cooked badly. The pasta was overdone, and the sauce was from a jar because Kiernan Draveth apparently could not cook sauce from scratch, which Charlie discovered that night, and which she found so genuinely delightful that she laughed in his face. She was still laughing when he took a small box out of his pocket. She stopped laughing. Charlotte, Kiernan, I'm going to ask you something. You can say no. You can say yes. You can say not yet. You can say, let me think about it. I'm going to say what I want to say first because I've been rehearsing it for a month and I'd like to say it out loud before I lose the nerve. Okay. He opened the box. The ring was not enormous. That had been deliberate. He had told her, months earlier, casually, over breakfast, in a conversation she had thought was hypothetical, that he thought a ring should fit on the hand of the person wearing it and not on the ring finger of somebody else's idea of a wife. The ring in the box was a narrow band with a single stone, not tiny but not showy, and the setting was clean enough that Charlie could see it would not catch on the apron she tied around her waist at the diner 3 mornings a week. She did not cry. She would cry later. At that exact moment, she was too focused. I'm not asking you because I need you, Kiernan said. His voice was low and careful, and she could hear him fighting to keep it steady, which he mostly succeeded in doing and mostly didn't. I don't need you. I'm alive. I'm clean. I'm not running from anyone. I'm asking you because the version of my life that has you in it is better than any other version I can imagine. And I'm asking you because it has been 2.5 years, and every single day has made me more certain and not less. I'm asking you because you told me in your kitchen, a long time ago, that I was not allowed to make decisions about your life without asking you first. And this is the biggest decision I could imagine, and I'm not going to make it for you. I'm going to make it with you. If you say yes, I don't want anything from you that you don't want to give. I don't want your name if you don't want to change it. I don't want a big wedding if you don't want one. I don't want the diner to go away. I don't want Sybil to stop being your maid of honor. I don't want your apartment to stop being our apartment. I want to marry you if you want to marry me. That's the whole thing. He ran out of breath at the end. He looked for a split second before he made his face do what he wanted it to do. Actually, young, like a version of himself that predated any of the rooms he had ever had to walk into. Charlie looked at him. She looked at the ring. She looked at the pot of overdone pasta on the stove. Yes, she said. Yes, Yes, I'm not. Kiernan, I'm not going to do the thing where I make you work for it. I'm not going to pretend I have to think about it. I thought about it 6 months ago. I thought about it when you slept on my couch for a week after I got the flu and made the foundation run from my kitchen table. I thought about it when you called me from Milan at 2 a.m. because you saw a painting that reminded you of my mother and you didn't know how to feel about it. Yes. Yes, I want to marry you. Yes. He put the ring on her finger himself. His hands were steadier than she expected. Hers were the ones shaking. When it was on, he looked at her hand on the kitchen table, her hand, with his grandmother's ring on it, on the chipped formica. And he started laughing, quietly, like he couldn't believe the ring was actually there, and she started laughing with him, and they sat at the table and laughed until Sybil, who Kiernan had apparently texted from the bathroom while Charlie was washing her face before dinner, buzzed up and let herself in with her own spare key, and then all three of them laughed together. The wedding was small. She had said she wanted small, and she meant small. They got married in October at a farmhouse in Vermont owned by the sister of a lawyer who worked at the foundation. The sister had offered the farmhouse, for the weekend, for free, for reasons that Charlie never fully figured out, and Kiernan declined to explain past a shrug. The ceremony was on the back porch. There were 18 people. Sybil was the maid of honor. Walter, who had retired to Florida in the end, and who had flown up on a Tuesday red-eye because he would not have missed it, was the one who walked Charlie out onto the porch because Charlie's father was not there, had not been there, and Walter, by then, was a better answer to that question than anyone else. Kiernan's mother was there. She had been there throughout, a small, quiet, formidable woman who had met Charlie for the first time in a hospital waiting room 3 weeks after the break-in at the house, and who had said, after 30 seconds of looking at her, "You're the one. Good. About time." That was the whole of the vetting. Kiernan's mother had hugged her once, firmly, and had then gone back to her book. At the wedding, she wore a navy blue dress, and she did not cry because she wasn't a crying person, but she sat in the front row with her hand curled tightly around the hand of the foundation's office manager, Denise, who had become her unlikely Tuesday night dinner friend somewhere around Charlie's second month at the foundation. Charlie's mother was not there. She was not, and Charlie had not pretended otherwise. But Charlie wore her mother's earrings, small gold hoops from the thrift store on Roosevelt Avenue. Her mother had worn them for 20 years. They did not match the dress, and Charlie did not care. The dress was not borrowed. That was, she realized on the morning of the wedding, the single largest change in her life from the night of the Ashmont Gala. Not the ring, not the foundation, not Kiernan in the next room drinking his coffee the way he drank it, but the dress. The dress was hers. She had bought it. She had not let him pay for it. She had not let anyone pay for it. It had cost her 3 months of saving from her diner shifts and an embarrassing amount of secret pricing research, and she had bought it in a small shop in the village run by a woman who had asked her, at the final fitting, "How does it feel?" And Charlie had said, truthfully, "It feels like mine," and the woman had said, "Good," and that had been that. The ceremony was 15 minutes. The vows, which Kiernan and Charlie had written the night before on the kitchen counter of the farmhouse, were not long. Charlie read hers first. Her hand shook. She didn't care. Kiernan, who did not cry, cried. Charlie watched him cry and didn't tease him about it until the reception, when she teased him about it extensively in front of Walter, who laughed so hard he had to sit down. She said the important thing near the end of her vows. She had written it down because she had not wanted to lose it. "I did not walk into that ballroom 2.5 years ago looking for you. I walked in looking for one night that wasn't mine because I was tired and I was scared and I wanted to feel, for a few hours, like the world was a place I could fit inside. You saw me, and you did not save me. I want to say that out loud because people keep saying it, and it isn't true. You didn't save me. You made a room where I could save myself. That's different. That's the whole difference. I'm choosing you now, in this room, in front of these people. And the choosing is the thing, not the saving, the choosing. For as long as I live, Kiernan, that is what I am promising you." Kiernan said his next. He looked at her the whole time he said it. He did not look at the lawyer's sister officiating. He did not look at the guests. He looked at Charlie, and he said, "I have been, most of my adult life, a man who was good at rooms. I was good at being the most dangerous man in a room.
I was good at being the quietest. I was good at being the one you didn't want to cross. I was not good, Charlotte, at being a person in a room with another person. I did not know how to do that. You taught me. You taught me by refusing to be anything smaller than yourself. You taught me by walking back to your kitchen and making tea out of tap water, and telling me you had conditions. You taught me by picking a drawing up out of a man's hand and donating it in front of 300 people. You taught me by saying, "Come in, it's cold." I'm not promising to be a better man. Better is other people's business. I'm promising to be a man who keeps trying, who shows up, who asks before he decides, who lets you keep the apartment, who sleeps with his feet off the end of the bed forever, if that's what it takes. That is what I'm promising, for as long as I live. That's all of it. They did not write to have and to hold. They did not write any of the words that had come out of books neither of them had read. They said what they had come to say. They kissed. Sybil made a noise like a tire being punctured, and everybody laughed, and somebody played music on a speaker that was not a professional speaker, and they danced. The two of them, on a back porch in Vermont, in October, with a cold wind coming down off the mountain, and Kiernan, who still did not dance well, and Charlie laughed at him the whole way through. Afterward, they stood out on the porch by themselves. The guests were inside. There was cake. Sybil was shouting about something. Walter was eating a second piece of cake, and Kiernan's mother was trying to pretend she was not also eating a second piece of cake. The light inside the farmhouse was yellow, and the light outside was gray-blue, and Charlie had her arms crossed against the cold, and Kiernan draped his jacket around her without being asked. "Ask," he said quietly. "Ask what?" "Whatever you're thinking, you have your ask face on." "I don't have an ask face." "Charlotte." She laughed. She did have an ask face. She had learned, over the previous 2 years, that Kiernan read her better than she read herself on most days, and there was no point pretending otherwise. "I was thinking about the first time you said my name," she said. "At the dance." "At the dance?" "I remember. I didn't think I was going to survive that night." "I know. I don't just mean the humiliation. I mean, I wasn't sure sometimes in those years whether I was going to keep going. I was very tired. I don't talk about that part. I don't think I ever have. But I was very tired, in a way that scared me a little, in the year before my mother got sick. I want you to know that about me. I want to say it out loud once. Not because I need you to do anything about it, because it's part of the shape of how I got to this porch." Kiernan looked down at her. He did not say "I'm sorry," because he had learned, finally, that she did not want him to be sorry for the parts of her life he had not caused. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for not making it a whole thing." "Charlotte." "Yes. I'm very glad you kept going." "Me too." She leaned against his side. His jacket was too big on her shoulders, and the sleeves came past her hands. She tucked her hands up inside them and looked out at the mountains, which were already starting to turn in the cold. She thought about the woman she had been that night at the Ashmont. The borrowed dress, the borrowed name on the invitation, the champagne fountain and Trenton Whitlock, and the laughter of 400 people who had decided collectively, in the space of 2 minutes, that she was something to be stepped on. She had not saved that woman. That woman had saved herself, slowly, over years, with a lot of help from a man who had eventually learned not to help too much. And she had not been made into something else by this life. She had been the same woman the whole time. She had only grown bigger inside her own outline. She was 26 years old. She would work at the foundation on Monday morning. She would pour coffee at the diner on Tuesday morning. She would be married by then for 3 days. The ring on her finger felt already like it had always been there. Inside, Sybil was shouting her name. "They want us for photographs," Kiernan said. "Then let's go do photographs." One more minute. One more minute. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head, above her mother's earrings, and they stood there for the minute. The wind came down off the mountain. Somewhere inside, Walter was laughing. A dog barked in somebody's field across the valley. Charlie thought, briefly and without drama, that a lot of things in her life were broken when she'd started, and that some of them were still broken now, and that marriage was not going to fix them either, and that was all right. She was not looking to be fixed. She was looking to live. She had done the work of becoming a person who could live, and now she was going to. She took Kiernan's hand. They went inside. The door closed behind them, and the kitchen light spilled yellow out onto the porch for a second through the window, and then the curtain shifted in the draft and the window went dark, and the porch was empty, and the wind pulled at the railing, and the mountains held the last of the evening light in their upper slopes, and then gave it up to the sky. A life, begun in a ballroom, ended up on a porch in Vermont. Not ended. Begun again. Just begun.